Hey guys, Emily Yates here. I'm going to be doing our third webinar in our three-part mental health series, and this one is going to be on depression. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I just want to start out by saying that depression is definitely, it's a wide-ranging disorder and it affects many other aspects of your life other than your mood. And I think if you have depression, you can really relate to that. And I do think in the past, there's been a certain shame or stigma attached to depression, and I'm really hoping we can address some of that stigma in this webinar because it's actually a lot more common than we think. And not getting help or feeling shameful for having depression can only make it worse. But I also want to say I think we've made a lot of progress with depression in terms of research, medication, different modalities that can help you with your depression. And so that's kind of what I want to focus on today, are just kind of some of the causes of depression, why we get depressed, and maybe when it's time to seek help, and then some ways you can start coping with depression, like just even at home on a daily basis. The causes of depression, they're different for everyone. So maybe for someone, they're going along their life, they're fine, they've never really dealt with depression, and then they have this huge disruption, some type of loss or intense conflict or trauma that can trigger depression. Or it can also be just a symptom of a physical illness. Sometimes chronic pain can turn into depression, or even a medication you're taking, a side effect of some medications can be depression. And then for other people, it's just purely biological, it's genetic, they were born with it, and it has to do with kind of neurochemical abnormalities in your brain. And then lastly, depression can be a combination of all three of these things, and any of them can follow some type of a crisis in your life. There's definitely a genetic component to depression, and a lot of scientists think that depressed people, the pathways in their brain are different and that makes them more vulnerable to depression. And also there might be deficient functioning in different neurotransmitter chemicals in our brains, things like serotonin and dopamine. And these are all, they kind of call them our feel-good chemicals. They make us happy, they make us feel connected to other people, they help us with concentration, motivation, things like that. And so if you're lacking those chemicals, you're going to feel more depressed. And so these neurochemical deficiencies, they can be genetic, and so the family tendency for depression is real, and you'll often see depression run in families. So depression can also be caused or triggered with our genetics interacting with our environment. And I've said this in other webinars on mental health. Everything around us influences our physical and our mental health. So you can actually feel like you're fine, you don't really feel like you're at risk for depression, and then something pretty major happens in your life, and then that can cause depression. And basically what's happening here is your nervous system after depression kind of gets sensitive to other stimuli, and so even when the danger or trauma is gone, your body's still kind of like ramped up, preparing and looking for danger. And so this makes us just more sensitive and overreactive to pain or stress or other stimuli, and that can kind of create a cycle of depression. There's also the depression-prone person or personality. I think, we all have such different personalities and how we relate to the world. But in studies they've done, they found depressed personalities, they tend to be ambitious and very conscientious and responsible, very hardworking. Those are all good qualities, of course, but one of the problems is they do set very high standards for themselves, and they have high standards of personal honesty and integrity, and they do this to themselves and others around them. And so that, I think, sometimes living up to those expectations can be very hard. And then also, there's some people, you might know now that really suffer from depression because they seem like they're doing well because this is kind of part of, living up to those standards, but inwardly they might actually be very sad or depressed. And I have to say, some of the people I know who suffer from depression are so talented and so hardworking and do so much. It's really hard to see them suffer with depression and how hard they are on themselves. And I think that's something I want to focus on later on in the webinar. I want to talk a little bit of just about depression and what it is. And I think some people think, oh, depression is just being sad, but it's so much more. So in depression, the pleasure centers in the brain, they're just not working very well. And the punishment parts of the brain, they're on overdrive. So even if things are going good in your life, if you're suffering from depression, everything feels bad. And I think if you do have depression, you can really relate to that. And what this does is it causes a perception error in your brain. So everything seems negative. And I know when I've suffered from depression, the only 2 times I have is after both my babies. That was probably the most intense symptom, is doing things I normally loved and not enjoying them. And that was a big red flag and should be a big red flag for everyone. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the manifestations of depression you might be feeling within yourself. So just kind of pay attention while I'm going through some of these slides and see if you can relate to some of these thoughts or feelings. So some of the thoughts you might be experiencing if you're suffering from depression are things like, nothing good ever happens to me. Life is not worth living. I'm worthless. I'm a failure. I'm alone. No one likes me. Kind of like I was saying, kind of that negative, 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 and you're really hard on yourself with your thoughts. Some of the physical symptoms you might be feeling within your body if you're depressed are difficulty sleeping, and we all know if we go too many nights without sleeping, it can make us feel sick and in a lot of pain. Poor appetite, definite things like muscle pain, weight loss, and just feeling tired all the time, like you have no energy even if you slept a full 10 hours the night before. Some feelings you might experience if you suffer from depression are easily overwhelmed over the smallest things. Generally unhappy, like I said, even when you're doing things you enjoy. Irritable, even the smallest things just kind of send you off. Easily frustrated, just kind of like you're just very reactive and frustrated with everything all the time. Angry, I don't think a lot of people really associate anger with depression, but this symptom and feeling is actually more common in men. So if you're a man and you feel like you're kind of getting angry all the time, it could be a sign of depression. And also just lack of confidence. Like I said, if you're depressed, you tend to be very hard on yourself. And so even if you are doing a really great job in keeping up on things in your life, you're still kind of lacking just that general confidence. The way we think and feel about ourselves for sure reflects in our behaviors. So if we're depressed and if we're having kind of these negative feelings about ourselves and we're kind of having a hard time reacting strongly to others, it's definitely going to reflect in our behaviors. And some of the behaviors you can see with depression is the biggest one is probably that social isolation, withdrawing from others, even, the people you love most in your life, your kids, your spouse, your good friends. And then also things like just getting tasks completed. Even a simple job at work might seem like the biggest project you've ever had to do in your entire life. And like I said, stop doing enjoyable activities. If you used to love skiing or hunting or baking and all of a sudden it just doesn't sound fun anymore, that's a big kind of behavioral issue with depression, is just not doing anything you love anymore. And then a big one is a hard time concentrating, and that has a lot to do with, I said, some of those neurochemicals in your brain. You're not getting enough of them, and it actually makes it harder for you to focus and concentrate, which can be very frustrating. So I don't like to get too heavy into stats and numbers in these webinars. I think they kind of lose attention, but I think it's important to also understand kind of the huge implications depression has on society at large and our healthcare system in particular. So, for example, almost half of the top users of medical care are those with depression. And so that's a big number. Half of medical users have depression. And only about 1/3 of depressed people are recognized for what they really have, depression, and being treated. And this leads to huge numbers of people who have underlying mental health issues going untreated, but then continually going back to the hospital trying to figure out what's going on. And so people with depression, this kind of would make sense then. You have 2.5 times more likelihood of physical illness and 4 times the normal mortality rate. So it has such a direct impact on our physical health and actually our longevity also, which is pretty crazy. And the thing is, though, is treating depression, if you can actually figure out, oh, well, that you're not actually sick, you have depression, it is proven to greatly reduce not only suffering, right, which is very important, but also disability, medical illness, and costs as well, which is a pretty big deal. So just kind of going along those same lines as the slide before. So if you do have depression and if it's going untreated, it really increases the likelihood of physical illness, and this can lead to greater use of tobacco use, alcohol dependence, and drug use during adulthood, which makes sense that you're kind of using that as a coping mechanism since you're not really treating your underlying condition, which is depression. And people with depression also have worse physical, social role functioning, which makes sense. Like I said, when you're depressed, you tend to isolate, you have a harder time around people. And so this is going to kind of impact the way you just are in the world with people around you. And like I said, it's definitely going to impact your physical health. And depressed people have 5 times the normal disability rate, which is really sad because usually if you suffer from a disability, it makes it really hard to go to work every day and do what you need to do every day to just kind of be a productive person. And I also think it's important to point out that women are twice as likely to suffer from depression as men, and I think I could do a whole other webinar on why women suffer more from depression, which has a lot to do with our hormones. So maybe I'll do a webinar on that. Okay, so as I've been doing this webinar, if you're like, ooh, I kind of feeling like maybe I am depressed, or maybe you already know you're depressed, or maybe you know someone who's depressed, I'm going to go through now like the actual diagnosing of depression. And what it is at least 2 weeks of depressed mood or lack of pleasure in everyday activities. And then another, like a combination of several other factors, which include weight loss or appetite change, insomnia or hypersomnia, so sleeping too little or sleeping too much, fatigue, like I said, just having no energy, even if you have slept a lot, feelings of worthlessness or guilt. Oh man, those are not good feelings to have, especially for 2 weeks straight. Lack of concentration, if you're having a hard time just completing simple tasks at work and getting behind, that's kind of a sign of depression. And then the big one, recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. So if you're relating to this slide and what I'm saying, I think it's really important to maybe consider seeking some help. Okay, let's kind of focus on some more positive things like what we can do if we're suffering from depression. A big part of dealing with depression is getting control over your symptoms. And if you can do that, 80 to 90% of people who suffer from depression can be helped significantly. So that's a big number. And typically, combined medication and counseling with behavioral treatment is the best. And we'll kind of talk about that later on. And treatment is effective and usually shows striking improvement. And I can't emphasize this enough, how important it is to get treatment and help. There's no shame in getting help. When I had postpartum depression, I think it's that first step, reaching out, that's the hardest part. And my husband had to help me through the whole process, and even just finding a number, that seemed like the biggest task in the entire world. But once I got on the phone with my midwife and kind of told her, I think I have postpartum depression, she told me how proud she was of me for making that call because she, a medical professional, suffered for 7 years with postpartum depression before she made that first call to get help. And so I'm like getting the chills thinking about that. Like, it's, you don't need to suffer for 7 years. And so honestly, reaching out for help, it's the hardest part. And from there, it seems easier. You kind of realize, oh, there's so many other people out there that are struggling. And then you start to realize, oh my gosh, there's actually so much support that's available to me. All I have to do is ask. So like I said, sometimes that first step can be the hardest part. So some conventional treatment options for depression that you'll see in more traditional settings like hospitals are going to be psychotherapy and antidepressants. So currently the most common treatment option for depression are antidepressants. And these are medications prescribed for depression that address some of the issues, like I said before, of kind of what's going on in your brain. And like I said, when you have depression, those pleasure centers in your brain, they're not working so great. And so you're kind of in that negative feedback loop I've been talking about. And medications will address this, you know, with our, you always hear about SSRI retake, uptake, you know, it's kind of technical, but basically what this is just putting more serotonin in your brain, and this is going to help regulate mood, social behavior, appetite, digestive, sleep, memory, sexual desire and function, things like that. And neuroepinephrine, this is going to help with alertness, motivation, and concentration. And so, like I said, these antidepressants, they're just kind of going to address some of what's going on with your brain. So if you're taking antidepressants, they're going to be a lot more effective if you are using them in combination with psychotherapy. And in a therapy session, I think some people, there's definitely a stigma with therapy. It's so weird. You're going deep and dark into your past. And, you know, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes we just need to talk through things with our therapist, and they can kind of help us determine what's happening in our life that's triggering the depression. And there are many different methods to do this. And if you find a good therapist, there's so many good therapists out there, they're going to find a treatment plan and a method that works for you. And believe it's not this weird thing. It's actually pretty basic common sense, just kind of learning how to cope, what's bothering you, what are your triggers, and then you can move from there. So don't be afraid of a therapist. I personally think everyone should go to a therapist at least once in their life. Now I want to talk about some lifestyle changes you can start doing at home that can really help with depression. But I think it's really important to first say there's no magic bullet or cure for depression, even antidepressants sometimes. It's kind of going through the process yourself personally of combining some of these healthy lifestyle practices with your conventional treatment and actually figuring out what works for you. But one thing we do know is things like exercise, social support, sleep, they're all necessary ingredients for good mental health for everyone. But if you have depression, you might have to be just a little bit more mindful about keeping up with some of this stuff. And also things like managing stress, spending some time in nature, and learning how to use social media more consciously can also be really helpful. So the first lifestyle change I want to talk about is exercise. Exercise and movement, they're one of the best things we can all do for our overall health, but especially for depression. And it's all about getting those endorphins moving, right? They just make us feel better, and they're so good at relieving stress also. But for depression, a big meta-analysis of 23 studies found that exercise itself is an effective treatment for depression. It also found that exercise is an effective add-on treatment to antidepressant medications. And so I think this study brings up an important discussion piece I want to talk about. The finding that exercise itself is an effective treatment for depression. I think we should talk for a moment about how depression is different for everyone along with their treatment. For some, things like stress management, diet, exercise can really help treat their depression. But like I said, there's no magic bullet for treating depression. What works for one person, what might not work for another person. But what we do know is if we do exercise, it can be a very complementary treatment and make your antidepressant just work better, right? So for a lot of people, treating mental illness is kind of a combo of many different strategies, and it's kind of up to you to find out what works specifically for you. So as mentioned, pushing family, loved ones, friends away can be a very common symptom of depression. But it's so important to do the opposite when you're feeling depressed, is to actually reach out even more and find emotional support from any avenue you can. I mean, maybe for some of us, reaching out to certain family members is just going to make our depression worse. Let's get real. You can talk to your therapist, right? That's social support. You can join a group activity, things like a book club, exercise classes, flag football teams. Find activities with people you like, activities you enjoy, and just make that effort to get out and find something. Maybe just find one thing where you can go out, join a group, and it will honestly make you feel so much better. So always remember, if you're feeling like you're isolating because you're depressed, that might actually be a sign you have to make that effort to reach out even more. But make sure you're reaching out to people that make you feel happy and at peace and good about yourself. Because you don't want to be with people that bring you down if you're depressed either, because I think that can also be a problem. For those of us who have made that connection with nature, and we know how powerful it can be in making us feel better, I don't know. I'm one of those people for sure. I think whenever, like during this pandemic, whenever I'm feeling anxious and stressed, I go out in my garden, do some weeding. I feel better. It's really amazing what nature can do for us. And I don't know what it is. You can just be in the park on a hike, staring at a mountain, and it makes you feel small, but I think in a good way, because it just kind of makes your ego melt away, and then you kind of start noticing or connecting that you're um, a part of something much bigger than yourself, and that just can actually make you feel much better. Um, that's been my experience with nature. It seems like once you get out in nature, you can be in a really bad mood, really pissed off about something, and then you're done with your hike and you're like, why was I so mad about that? It kind of can make your problems seem less significant. And so if you live I think living in Utah, I mean, everywhere we go, there's mountains and beautiful scenery. Try just getting out in nature, go for a walk in a park and see if you can kind of tap in to the peacefulness nature can give us. Sleep is a pretty big one with depression, but the thing about sleep with depression is it can go either way. For some people, when they're depressed, they tend to sleep too much. It's a little bit of a coping thing for them, and they can sleep all day, all the time. Just sleep is their happy place. But then there's other people with depression where they're not getting enough sleep. And so I think it's important to talk about sleep with your doctor. This is maybe an issue to talk about a doctor with, but overall, 7 to 9 hours of sleep is average for an adult. But I think if you are having sleep issues, sleeping too little or sleeping too much, this might be something you might need to think about. Okay, we got to talk about social media because with everything that's happening in the world today, social media is dark. It's not great. And I think a cruel irony of depression is that you feel like you're alone, but in reality, depression is something that we share it with millions and millions of other people. And I think in the age of social media, we feel like we're more connected than ever, but yet we're so disconnected at the same time. It's not the perfect form of communication. That's just totally a thing. So if you're using social media, pay attention to how you feel afterwards. If you feel lonely or upset or sad, you should really try to limit your use and take some time to disconnect from your phone or manage the content of your phone better. If there's certain apps or social media pages, whatever you're looking at that are upsetting to you, set a time limit or just don't look at them at all. But I think it's really important to start that process of how you feel after. I know for me, sometimes my phone, it's like a huge energy suck and it's just not worth it. So just start that process of paying attention how you feel afterwards. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about stress. Things are very stressful right now, and actually, stressful events can actually increase your risk for depression. And there's also evidence that the way we react and respond to stress impacts the development of depression. So it's super important to learn how to cope with stressful life events. Um, it's for both our mental and physical well-being, and this is what I want to spend the rest of this webinar on, is kind of some stress management skills. Okay, so right now, like, stress management is this huge umbrella with tons of different techniques and modalities to kind of help you deal with stress. But I think for depression, I want to kind of focus on stress resilient techniques using self-compassion. And self-compassion is just basically being nice to yourself, having a little compassion and understanding for yourself. And the tools we use to kind of cultivate self-compassion are mindfulness and self-kindness. So just as a review, I already talked about this before, but I just kind of want to get this in your brain again. So under stress and depression, the pleasure centers in our brain, remember, they're not working so great. And so the punishment centers, they're on overdrive, right? So even when things are good, right, you feel bad. And this is the perception error I was talking about, where everything seems negative. And this often includes the way you perceive and talk to yourself. So when we are depressed and when we struggle and everything is seeming negative, it's not uncommon to think you're all alone in your pain, in your suffering, and your struggle. And then what kind of happens when we're in that mode is we often develop a heightened sense of uniqueness in our suffering. And basically what that means is that we feel we are the only ones who suffer, or that we hurt more than others. And this is not true. We all struggle and we all suffer in some way, every single one of us. And when we think this way, a couple things start happening that aren't so great for us in dealing with depression. First of all, this kind of keeps us from learning from others in our life, right? Because we kind of think we're alone in this. So we're not like really talking to other people or asking them how they feel. And then this also keeps us from taking opportunities to confide in others and receive validation for our suffering. And then we kind of become self-focused on our mishaps, often in the form of expressing a lot of self-criticism, which is not great. When we're in this place of suffering alone, or think we suffer more than others, or our pain is more intense, we forget just a basic sense of connection to humanity, right? And suffering, mistakes, failures are precisely a part of the human experience, in that the suffering is shared, right? And that's something you have to understand, that like, you are not alone in your pain. We all have struggles. We all have like so much we're going through in our lives. And that's kind of why I want to focus on self-compassion, because self-compassion, it can help us keep a broad perspective, inclusive of difficulty, and you kind of are connected to your struggle in a more positive way. And then when we combine mindfulness and self-compassion, it kind of helps us become less attached to our thoughts and connect to ourselves in a positive way, and also to other people, which is crucial to kind of learn how to reach out and connect with others. Let's try a little thought exercise for a moment to see how compassionate you guys are all with yourselves. So think for a moment about a time when you feel bad about yourself or a time you've struggled. Just think of an experience. Now think, how do you typically respond to yourself in these situations? Like, what's your normal reaction? What do you typically do? What do you think about yourself? What do you say to yourself? Kind of go through that process and think about that for a minute. And then I want you to note the tone in which you talk to yourself. Is it like the scolding mom or dad? Or is it kind? Is it angry? Is it frustrated? Like, just what's the general tone or vibe of the way you talk to yourself when you struggle? And I want you to think about this as I go through some other parts of this webinar. Like I said, mindfulness is a tool we can use to start kind of creating more self-compassion in our lives. But let's really quick talk for a moment about what mindfulness is, and it's pretty simple. Mindfulness is simple attending to the present moment. And think of it like having a beginner's mind, or you're the observer. But it's really important while you do this, you do it in an accepting way. You accept what's happening. You don't instantly try to change everything. You do it in a non-judgmental way, so you're not judging yourself or others or the situation. And lastly, you just have compassion. Even if you're really annoyed with someone, you try to find the compassion and love in whichever situation you're dealing with. Let's talk about how mindfulness works. And as I go this, I think you can kind of see how mindfulness could be really beneficial with depression. So with mindfulness, there's this sustained attention on the present, not the past and not the future. And so typically with depression, we tend to focus on the past, right? And with like something like anxiety, you tend to kind of focus on the future. And when you have depression and you're too focused on the past, you're really kind of focusing on all the things you did wrong in the past, or what went wrong, or what could have gone better, which is not super productive. And so mindfulness can kind of teach us how to switch our attention, right? So we're kind of getting out of that space of always thinking in the past, and this helps us prevent the processing of negative information and kind of that rumination, right? Kind of that continually thinking about the same thing, which is not very helpful. And also, mindfulness is very action oriented. So in the moment, you're actually doing something about your depression. And it's action oriented because you're creating awareness of thought patterns. And this is maybe one of the first things you need to do to change any bad behavior. You have to become aware of how you're thinking. And mindfulness is also action oriented because it's changing the physiology of your body. It's calming down your body. Your breathing calms down. And then when that happens, you can kind of get out of that super reactive space where you're overreacting, and you can kind of face life in a more positive, kind of content, peaceful manner, which always ends up in a better outcome, I promise. Some of the benefits of mindfulness, I think the biggest one is something called emotional regulation. So you can kind of regulate your emotions better, right? You can kind of cut down on the rumination, the suppression. Suppression's kind of like not really allowing some of the bad stuff to come out, and you can calm your body down. It also decreases reactivity, and I think when you have depression and when you're unhappy and irritable, I think we can all relate to maybe snapping or reacting too strongly to situations in a way where afterwards we're maybe not so proud of ourselves or our behavior. And it also teaches us to become less attached to our thoughts, which is so important with depression. Like I said, that negative perception error, right? So if you're kind of always thinking, I'm the worst, I'm no good, I can't do it, you're going to get less attached to those thoughts. And all of a sudden, if you practice mindfulness, you're just going to hear that nagging voice and you're going to laugh at it. It's not going to have so much power over you. And mindfulness can also create new pathways in our brain, right? So when you think negative thoughts all the time, you're actually creating like these like traffic freeway roads like in your brain that aren't very helpful. So this is going to kind of redirect the traffic to a more positive place. And then lastly, you're just going to get, like I said, some more of that compassion for yourself and for others, which if you feel that compassion, I think you can feel depression melting away, to be honest. That was just a quick little synopsis of mindfulness, and there's actually so much more to mindfulness and actually quite a bit of really good science involved in mindfulness, a lot of really good studies. And these guys here, Mark Williams, John Teasdale, and John Kabat-Zinn, these guys are they're the masters. They've done all of the mindfulness training, and this book specifically, The Mindful Way Through Depression, is such a great resource. If you want to start somewhere, start here, because it's really going to kind of talk about some of what I've talked about, what's happening with your brain when you're depressed, and some of your kind of faulty thinking, and how to address that using mindfulness. And then there's also the Mindful Way Through the Mindful Way workbook, and this is more of a program that's going to teach you some specific exercises, breathing, mindfulness techniques. And so these are really great resources and a really great place, an easy way to get started to kind of implementing mindfulness in your life to treat and to cope and manage your depression. Now I want to just speak for a minute about self-kindness and how to cultivate positive feelings towards yourself. And for some of you, this might sound kind of funny or cheesy, but it's actually very powerful. So self-kindness is offering yourself warmth, caring, and understanding, even and especially in the face of flaws or mistakes. And I just want to share my personal story with my postpartum depression and my therapist. I think it didn't take her very long to figure out that I was too focused on my flaws and my mistakes, and I was very hard on myself. And she told me, right here, right now, you are okay. And those two were, you are okay. Oh my gosh, I broke down crying, and I think a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I think I didn't realize how hard I was being on myself. And so after that session, I really started practicing self-kindness to help my depression. And I cannot tell you how much it helped me. And just this ability to accept the reality that one cannot always get or be what one wants to be. A lot of this is accepting yourself, accepting that you're okay just the way you are is huge. And then cultivating a sense of benevolence in the face of that reality. Like, we don't have control over everything that happens to ourselves, but in the end, just learning to be okay with yourself and be kind to yourself, it's a huge tool. And I think if you are in that pattern of being hard on yourself and all you notice is the flaws rather than your strengths, it's really, really super hard to progress in life. And so I want to go over a little meditation that might help you kind of cultivate some self-kindness in yourself. So this is a guided meditation for loving kindness. And this isn't some random meditation I got off Google or whatever. This is an evidence-based meditation that's used for depression, anxiety, trauma. It has a lot of really good data, and it's actually really simple and really beautiful. And you can Google this and you can actually have someone take you through it, but this is the premise, and I kind of want to talk you through it. So you kind of have to sit down, get comfortable like you would. You don't have to do like the full lotus meditation thing. Just get comfortable, start breathing, take a few deep breaths, try to kind of get your body calm. Get the belly breaths going, deep belly breaths. And then either out loud or silently, you just kind of repeat this mantra. And it's, may I be full of loving kindness. May I be happy. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be well. This seems like simple words in the simple mantra, but with how hard we are on ourselves, giving yourself permission to be nice to yourself is quite powerful. And if you don't cry when you do this, I don't know. I cried the first time I did this. It's just that permission to be nice and oh my God, I'm okay. And the next is you bring into your mind someone who inspires you. Who's someone that you think is just the best person? They're doing such a great job. Oh my gosh, you love them. They inspire you. You send that love and that kindness to them. And then you do this to someone in your life who you care about. This can be a friend, this can be a partner, this can be your child, anyone. So you're just kind of building up that love, in a progression. And then it kind of changes. Then you do this to someone you barely know or kind of feel neutral towards. Maybe it's a coworker or a friend of a friend, just kind of like starting to build up that love and compassion and kindness to other people. And then this is the hard part, and some of you might struggle with this. This can be really hard. You do this with the person that you're really irritated or upset with or have just super negative feelings towards. But when you do this, you send them love, you send them happiness, you send them peace, and you send them wellness. If you can do this, it's actually really powerful because you do start to kind of feel that kindness in yourself and that compassion and that connection, right? Like I said, we're all in this together. And then you just do this at once for all beings everywhere, for your humanity, and you just send warmth and kindness out to everyone. And I think with what's happening in the world right now, we should all be doing this meditation because we just all need a little more love, I think. And then you just bring the attention back to yourself. And so you kind of connect with how you're feeling. Are you peaceful? And like, how did that make you feel? So I think if you are suffering from depression, this can be a really powerful meditation. Give it a try. It seems kind of hokey, kind of cheesy, but it's pretty powerful. I also just wanted to give a quick shout out to this website, selfcompassion.org. This is Dr. Kristen Neff. She has an excellent TED Talk. You guys can just Google her name and TED Talk. She's a big researcher on self-compassion, and I love this. Her kind of the way she summarizes self-compassion is with self-compassion, we give ourselves the same kindness and care we'd give to a good friend. So with that thought exercise I gave you guys, if you find you're kind of talking not so nice, try talking to yourself the way you would talk to a good friend when you're trying to make them feel better. Like, give them support, be easy on them, be kind with them, be funny with them, do the same thing to yourself, and it's actually quite remarkable how that can shift your mood so quickly. But if you are interested in self-compassion, I really recommend checking out this website and also her TED Talk if this is something that interests you. Now I want to talk about some lifestyle changes you can make that involve body work. So these are going to be things like yoga, relaxed stretching, maybe Pilates, Tai Chi, and kind of the idea of this is putting the body under stress while you try to relax the mind. And this is quite powerful, actually. It can become an experiential metaphor in a way for life where you're trying to find calmness under stress or mental discomfort. And so one thing I think we should talk about is some of the pain associated with depression. Like I said, a lot of people with depression tend to go to hospitals and they're hurting a lot, and you can actually have these holding patterns in your body with depression. Like some people really feel it in their back, some in their stomach, some in their shoulders, and this kind of even can create like this posture in your life that creates pain, right? It all starts in your neck, then it runs down to your shoulder, then it goes down to your back, right? And so yoga can be a really powerful tool to kind of connect with where in your body you're holding on to this depression or stress, and learning how to deal with it, learning how to deal with the pain, learning to breathe through it. And it's okay. Like I said, so much of dealing with mental illness is learning how to be okay with the discomfort mental illness brings us. And this is such a great resource here, Yoga with Adriene. I'm a yoga instructor myself, and I don't love a lot of the yoga on YouTube. You have to really go through it, but this is a great resource. She'll really talk you through what's happening in your mind and your body, and she has these sequences that are just amazing. So like yoga for depression, she has yoga for insecurity, yoga for anxiety. So check this website out. It's the perfect time. We're not getting out as much. It's a really great resource. Okay, the last lifestyle change you can implement at home for depression is simple breathing. Mindful breathing can improve our mental flexibility and reduce our depressive symptoms when we have depression. Like I said, when we have depression, we kind of tend to focus and ruminate on the past. And one thing about breathing is here and now with us every day, every second. And it can be a real quick way to just bring us back to the present really quickly. And so there's a link here that takes you through some pretty simple breathing exercises to kind of learn how to breathe. And like I said, this is a practice, right? So you have to do it more than once to see the benefits. If your body is kind of on that overdrive, like I said, like your nervous system's really overstimulated and super reactive, it's going to take a minute for you to calm down your nervous system and learn how to get, more present and just react in a different way. So out of all of these modalities I tried you, maybe just pick one to start with, give it a try, and if you do it, give yourself a big hug, a big congratulations, because it's a big deal when you try these things. And also, don't expect these immediate results. Like I said, dealing with depression, mental health, life in general, it's such a process. It's such a learning process. So don't be hard on yourself if you don't get results right away. But like I said, breathing is just a really easy, great way to just quickly calm the body down. So give it a try. These are some apps I thought I would recommend. Just a quick, disclaimer. All of these apps aren't free, but I know these are good mental health apps. So for some of you, if maybe you don't have a lot of education or experience with some of mental health kind of coping skills, I think some of these apps can be a really great tool. So if these types of things work for you, the apps motivate you, they kind of keep you on track, I don't think it's a bad idea to check them out. So maybe take some time, see if any of these interest you at all. Okay, and here's some resources for you all. Like I said, if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, stress, trauma, there's help. And like I said, sometimes making that first step, that first call, it can be the hardest part, but once you do it, it kind of opens so many doors to so many resources, so much support, and you're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I do this 7 years ago, like my doctor, right? So just ask your employee about any EAP programs, or there's a lot of great local mental health resources. And also, if you're a PHP member, you can call member services and determine if your family members are eligible for some mental health services. All right, that's the end of the webinar. Thanks so much for watching this, taking the time. I really appreciate it if you do. That's so kind. That's awesome. If you have any questions, if you would like further resources, my email is on the top slide. Just send me an email. I love that. I have a whole bookshelf right here full of resources, so just let me know. Love to help you guys out. Hope you have a great day. Keep cool. It's hot out there. Bye.